Welcome back to Cast Me to Hell with me, Seb.
And with me, Robbie.
And here we are, episode 48. And we are taking our first ever trip, surprisingly enough. I think I'm correct. Our first ever trip
Yeah.
to Elm Street.
This is our first one.
Yeah, it was weird. It was 2 years and we never hit Elm Street. With A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, not even starting with the original.
Well, we thought it's the 35th anniversary of Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors, in March. So I thought it's February the 27th that this was released. So it was actually yesterday that this film was first released in the United States, all the way back in 1987. So we thought we'd celebrate the anniversary of what I think is the best sequel in the franchise. But what is also a really important film in the franchise, not just in terms of kind of the character Freddy himself and some lore for the character, but also in the actual kind of the direction that the franchise was going to take, the dream sequences, and in my opinion, a lot of the death scenes in this kind of start to get more elaborate, which is kind of what the franchise later becomes known for. And as somebody on Twitter kind of said, to go to the social media lounge kind of first, I think it was Simon from So I Married a Horror Fan podcast, who was obviously with us last week when we did the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Obviously, if you missed it, go and check out that episode. But I think he said that it almost feels like it's kind of the original, maybe it wasn't him, but somebody said that it's kind of so I just gave him a shout out. He's our boy anyway. But said that it kind of feels as if it's like an original requel, in so much that we get Heather Langen coming back after being, and John Saxon after being absent. I was about to say abstinent, after being absent from the second film. So yeah. Seb.
I feel like. I'm not so sure if that one gets the requel status, because I kind of feel like
definitely not.
That's more. It's more, you could say, a concluding part in a trilogy, which tends to bring back characters from the past. Not that this was a planned trilogy in any such way. As Nightmare on Elm Street fans will know, and things like that Wes Craven never really envisioned this as a franchise, and especially not a franchise the way it went. Wes Craven never really liked the comedic elements of the Freddy character. He had small comedic elements in the original, but for the most part, he was more of a kind of a scarier figure when he wasn't talking, in his eyes anyway. And
the stuff that he did say in the first two were that kind of creepy stuff that he would say. Whereas I think in this one, it's when we start to get the puns and we start to get the quips after the kills, but we still have a bit of a darker Freddy. So this is kind of when I say it's an important film in the franchise. Stylistically, we still have a slightly this kind of dark version of Freddy, but the comedy elements start to come in. Yeah, best of both.
Best of both worlds we get here.
Yeah. I think the film itself opens incredibly. You first, Epo, before I steamroll into the opening.
Before steamrolling into that opening. No, I think you're right. In the original, it was much more of that kind of, that he's this kind of whatever you want to call him, paedophile or sexual predator. There's much more darkness to the dog wants to be released. She's locked herself in the room with me.
Oh, fun.
There's much of a darker darker edge in the original film. And then obviously we had the sequel, which I personally, I haven't revisited the sequel in a long time, to be fair. I hadn't revisited these films in a long time. I do need to revisit them. But the fact that 12 or 13-year-old me really didn't like the sequel, I just always remember finding it really boring, and I just didn't like the direction. I felt like they had all these amazing ideas that they could have had with this character, and I felt like in the sequel they took none of those directions. They did like the most boring way they could have approached the story to me.
And I think that's, for me, that's the problem with the sequel. I mean, there are some stuff in Freddy's Revenge that I do really like. Jesse as a character, I really like. Freddy, even himself, has some horrid quotes and moments in that. This kind of deformed dog monster he has is cool. The opening scene on the bus is really cool, and there's a lot that I do like about it. Even watching it when you're an adult and the kind of eroticism of it, which I could always do with more in my slasher films. That for me, that those things are okay, but I think the problem with it was that they were in this stage where I think they'd introduced this new character and they had this idea of killing people through dreams, and I think it's more of a mishandling of that than that. I find it's the possession element, that Jesse is being possessed to do these things and to bring Freddy into the real world, which kind of doesn't really work. Whereas I think with this one, I think they went back to the drawing board and thought, well, actually, what was effective about the first one was the dream sequences and the idea of being powerless against him because everybody has to sleep and that kind of stuff. So I think that they kind of found their footing a lot more with this. That's what I'd say about Freddy's Revenges. I think it's an enjoyable film, but I think it's very messy and very muddled in kind of what it wants to be.
I will have to revisit it, but I definitely have not. I don't really have any fond memories of it. I just remember being so disappointed after loving the original so much, and then watching that one, and that might be part of why I really love this third one, because I felt like this one truly. I feel like possibly out of all of the Nightmare on Elm Street films, I feel like this one got what would make the perfect kind of mixture of an Elm Street film, of a Freddy film. Like I felt like this film shows the true potential of what Freddy Krueger could do and what the nightmare dream sequences could really do for the character and the story.
And that's kind of why I want to jump straight into the opening of it, because each of the films do open kind of with this dream sequence. But the opening of this film with Patricia Arquette obviously being introduced as what's her name? Is it Kristen Parker? It's I think it's so it's so awesome with. It kind of instantly goes into, her trying to stay awake, and then her mum's got, a guest and tries to put her to bed, and, she kind of goes into, and it's almost straight into it. The thing that I kind of like is, because this is the third film in this franchise, there's almost kind of no need for the exposition. We know instantly what's going on. When she walks into the house and she sees the little girl singing the song and playing jump rope and doing all of this kind of iconic stuff that's been established in the first 1 and 2. And then when she goes into the house and she sees the little girl, and the little girl says he's coming, and then we get Freddy. I just love the way it starts off, and she's running through this kind of house, which is almost has this haunted house feeling to it. She goes into, I think she's running with the little girl, and then the floor turns into blood at one point, and then she escapes. We get a slight hint of Freddy, and we hear his laugh, and then she goes into another room, and there's all of the hanging corpses, and then the body, she's got the skeleton. It's incredible.
It's incredible. I mean, just straight off the bat, this film makes itself clear so clearly, like its vision. It looks like horror art brought to life.
Yeah,
it literally is like it's where you could be like, I bet they showed the concept art, and this actually looks like what the concept art. You see a lot of films, and a lot of films show the concept art, and you're like, wow, that was kind of, the original idea was much grander than what you actually end up with sometimes on screen. Whereas this one is just like, that is like a beautiful piece. Those hanging bodies with the weird kind of eerie, like there's the kind of like a never-ending kind of backdrop to the sides of it, with lights and stuff, which is just, it's so incredible. Like this film, the special effects in this film are just outstanding. Like literally, there are so many we're going to talk about, but straight from the get-go, that scene, you've got that, and then obviously that's followed by her looking down at the girl, isn't it? She hears the voice of the little girl. She looks down, and the body is charred, like one of Freddy's young victims or something like that, like kind of thing. It's such an effective scene.
Yeah, and then I love that, when she jumps and she wakes up, or we think she wakes up, she then goes into the bathroom, and when she runs the tap, it grabs her, and then the other tap forms into Freddy's claw. And that's what I mean, where this film shows the kind of creativeness that we can have with the dream sequences. And one thing that I love about Nightmare on Elm Street is that it sometimes blurs the lines between when's the character asleep and when are they awake, and particularly with we get this kind of opening in this house with the hanging bodies and being chased by Freddy, and then we're kind of lulled into a little bit of a false sense of security where, okay, she's awake, and then all of a sudden it's another dream, and her mum comes in, she's cutting her arms, which obviously not only it does it kind of set up the rest of the story, because then she's taken to the psych ward, but it does it in such a way which kind of plays with the already established themes and already established kind of stuff in the other two, that it's almost like it's not the start of the film in a strange way. Within 5 minutes we're introduced to Kristen, we're introduced to already established character Freddy Krueger in the dream world, and then we're already straight into the psych ward because we have a reason for her being there instead of like a long kind of drawn out reason. So it kind of moves it at quite a hefty pace, but it's pretty good.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then obviously you said about it kind of setting up kind of like the plot of the beginning of the plot of this film, or at least the kind of setting of the film. And this is another thing that I absolutely love about this film, is the fact that it's not scared of going a little bit darker and kind of digging a little bit deeper into kind of problems in the world kind of thing, and problems that people deal with all of the time. Like, obviously it twists it a little bit, because the reason that we have all these characters which are all kind of on the psych ward and are high risk and worried of things like suicide and things like that is because of Freddy and the sleep deprivation that they've had. But it's the fact that it approaches something like suicide, when it weirdly it works perfectly for this franchise. The idea, the way that they play the characters like that, it just is it's such a good idea.
Yeah, and I love that it's the implication that the characters are already kind of haunted by Freddy Krueger. So usually the first kind of Nightmare on Elm Street teases the idea, doesn't it? Where Nancy says she has the dream, but I think it's implied that it's the first time she has the dream, and then she tells Tina about her dream, and then Johnny Depp, Glenn is like, and he's got this glove or something like that. So it teases the idea that this is something that's happening to them all. But in this, it's almost as if they've all had something which has led them to be institutionalized, and they've got to the point where they're whipped into frenzy and they're almost ripe for the picking. The fear level is so high, and the characters that we get, obviously Nancy returns, but then we get Philip, who's the sleepwalker. We get Kincaid, who's like who's the tough guy and is kind of has this violent outburst. We get Jennifer, who's the the hopeful actress. We get Will, I think his name is, who's the wheelchair dude, the wizard master, who's obviously had a suicide attempt. We get Taryn, who, if you went all the way back to our first episode of In Memoriam Characters We Don't Want to Die, she was one of my picks, and this was the first time we discussed this film. And then we get Joey, who's who's too traumatized to speak, but is also an absolute horn dog. And I kind of love Joey, and it's kind of we get introduced quite quickly to it. So when Kirsten's in the in kind of first institutionalized and they're trying to sedate her, and she starts singing the nursery rhyme. I think we get Nancy a little bit before then, when she meets the doctor. But then we kind of have this.
I think that is when we first meet Nancy, isn't it?
Because I think it is.
They talk about some young hotshot. Like I'd forgot the links there. I'd forgot who it was actually. So when they were talking about, he's talking like, this young, like, I don't want him coming in changing our ways. I know these kids. You can't. And then Nancy kind of comes in and just like basically like straight away just proves him wrong. Like, look.
Sorry, that's it. Yeah, she comes in there, doesn't she?
Yeah.
And then I think they then they have the. Is that when they have the first kind of group therapy session? I really like the group therapy sessions in this film. I really like it as a way to kind of introduce characters, and there's the one bin, I can't remember her name, who's the kind of matriarch of the ward. She reminds me of Marion Crane from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It's very clear she's supposed to be like that. And I like the group therapy sessions that we get, where we get to flesh out the characters a little bit. They have a bit of back and forth with each other.
Yeah, it's one good thing is you get a good sense of each of the characters. You know what they're like, but you also the difference I think here is we also get to know really well their vulnerabilities, which is obviously prime for Freddy because that's what he's going to play into. But it's a nice idea that we get to know their vulnerabilities. We also get to know what they're like outside of the dream worlds, and it becomes a strong part of the characters once we know what they're like inside the dream world. Like, say, Taryn gets a great arc in terms of what she's inside and outside of the dream world. Yeah.
And like you said, I think when we're introduced to these characters and we find out what the kind of weaknesses are, what they're into and how they are, I think this is when the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise handles it really well, because each of these characters, we find out kind of what their obsessions are and how they work and what kind of defines them, which is kind of always, it has the irony of playing into their deaths. However, I find that as we kind of get further into the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, it just becomes, this is this character and this is who they are. I think in Dream Master, the one after this, I think it still works a little bit. We have the asthmatic girl, and we have the girl who's into fitness, so they kind of work. But I think the worst one for me is, the comic book guy, the guy who loves comic books, and it's kind of all he is.
Yeah.
And then he goes that, and then there's the guy, the deaf guy. Freddy kills him with the chalkboard, and the deaf start to turn away from me after this film. They turn away from using these characters' fears and traits against them in a terrifying way to just being kind of like punchlines almost, like, oh yeah, this is when after this film I think you start to turn around and be like, actually I'm kind of rooting for Freddy because he kills people in funny ways, so I'm kind of
to see I think this is the film which, as you mentioned, it really is that major turning point for the franchise. But I think this is the film where I like the balance. I like the little bit of the quips. We get an occasional little quip in this film. We get him in some different varied forms. We get different costumes, and we get him appearing as different kind of creatures. And that's all cool. I think that all works perfectly with the whole dream nightmare sequence idea that was in the original film. We get a lot more opportunities here. I do think it's a downfall of the franchise. Some people, they know Freddy because they know him as this funny killer character. And I prefer him as this. I prefer him as, I don't think he's scary anymore after this film.
No.
I think this is the last time that he is somewhat scary. What he does to them in this film is kind of what still remains to keep him scary. Just like in the original, like he's a bit more in the shadows, but what he does to them is scary. After this film, I think it is a major turning point where they go, hey, in Dream Warriors, he was a little bit more funny, wasn't he? Yes, we should make him more funny. We should give him more quips and more lines. And and I just think it's what went wrong with this franchise. This film, if they were going to say, a whole requel thing that was mentioned earlier, if they were going to do not necessarily a requel, because the legacy is going to be a hard one to do after this film. You know what I mean? That original legacy is a bit hard to do. But at the same time, if they're going to bring back Freddy, and obviously I know that Robert Englund doesn't really want to do it anymore. I think he's done. He's old enough now that he's like, fuck that, I'm not doing all that. So we'd have to find a different way to do it. People are going to have to accept that it's not Robert Englund if we want any more Nightmare on Elm Street. But this film is the perfect template for what it should be. Not the original film, this film. For what a modern day Nightmare film should be. It's not like the remake, which just tried to make it darker. It's not that. It's make it more creative and interesting. Not Freddy can still be that scary, darker character, but make him inventive and imaginative.
Well, I mean, if we go to the first death in this film, which is amazing, but it's terrifying.
It is,
and that is Philip the Sleepwalker, So they have this kind of, at the group therapy, they talk about who's going to die, X, Y, Z. And then, if I'm trying to remember if he's the one who is on shift with Joey and says, no, that's Will. I think Kincaid
Will
is,
and Joey are in the room, and Kincaid's in the room with Philip.
Yeah, Kincaid is with Philip, and then so Philip is introduced as this character who sleepwalks, but he's also kind of carves things and makes puppets, but they weren't allowed to have them. And then obviously Freddy appears as a puppet, and then
that's so cool.
It's awesome, isn't it?
The clay turns into Freddy, and he just looks, again, it looks so detailed and so real. The special effects on that puppet alone, him moving around and cutting himself off of the strings and pulling, into his little, and then growing into Freddy.
It's awesome.
It's 1987, but it looks just as good as if you'd CGI'd it nowadays. I think. I think it still stands up perfectly.
And then when he kind of cuts into Philip,
it's so brutal, that bit.
It's brutal.
Like, it looks so real. It's an interesting one of where he cuts him in the dream and makes that happen, but that doesn't actually appear in the real world. So on the outside in the real world, he doesn't, which is a strange exception to some of his normals, especially established in the original. where if he cut you in there, it would appear. Whereas this time, he cuts it out open and he pulls out it's his muscles, isn't it? It's his muscles.
I think it's like his
veins or
like
tendons, and pulls them out of his arms and his legs, and you see them kind of tear up. So it's both brutally graphic and it's weird. You're there, like you're terrified at like the idea that someone could control you. But he could have told him like Nightmare on Elm Street 2, he could have just been a possession thing where he goes inside of his body or something. But instead, no, it's a literal, I'm going to use your love of puppets, I'm going to turn you into the puppet.
Yeah, and then when, it's horrid just seeing him yank on his tendons and how he's walking, he's walking out, and then he takes him to the high building. But I think it's also that Joey is the one who spots it, isn't it? Because he's making sure that Will's asleep. And then Joey, being mute, can't alert people, so he wakes Will up and then makes Will watch, and then he goes, he gets the tray and he's clanging people's cells, rooms, whatever we call them, and then it's that all of rooms. It's that all of the main characters, and I believe Larry Fishburne, at the time, I believe his character is also watching it. So. And they kind of, they believe that Philip's jumping, don't they? Because I don't think they can see Freddy. But it's this idea that they're being forced to watch one of their own be killed, and they know that it's only a matter of time until it happens to one of them. And it's this kind of horror and this, in a way, this kind of black humor that Freddy has, forcing them, to watch, because they're powerless to help him. Philip is powerless to stop himself, and it's such an amazing death. I think it's probably I would probably say it's my favorite death in this film, because it's so good.
Probably, it might well be one of my favorite in the entire franchise, to be honest. It's so creative. It's scary in the way that someone could be controlled like that. It's visually, again, visual effects on all points are fantastic, including the bit that could have looked really cheesy but doesn't. The bit where you get, and it shows how powerful Freddy can be when you've got Philip standing just about to fall off of the ledge, and you get the shot of Freddy and his hand over the top, with the and then you see him slice the strings and Philip just falls. Like, that shot could have looked really cheap, but it shows how good these special effect artists in this film have concentrated. And I did hear that most of the budget was spent on special effects for this film, and it shows.
Yeah.
It shows. I mean,
look, we were talking about some of the amazing special effects. There's a scene earlier where Kristen is being chased, and it establishes that Kristen is able to summon people into her dreams. And it's the Freddy snake, that giant worm-like snake that bursts through the mirror.
Oh yeah, I forgot. It comes back later, doesn't it? She sees it earlier, but it comes back later as well, doesn't it?
But it starts swallowing. It starts swallowing Kristen, which is when she summons Nancy into the dream, and it's like you said, it's just this. It's such an amazing kind of thing of special effects where it looks gross and looks slimy,
But that concept, I know the whole idea she can summon people into that's kind of taken it a little bit like next level in a way. But the idea that you could be in control in your own dreams and you could be who you want to be, and that's how you could defeat Freddy. I love that idea that's one of the concepts in this film that is such a good idea, that they can overcome their fear and they can use their brains and their imagination, and they could become something that could defeat. Yes, it doesn't always work. He is more powerful than them, but the idea that they can do that, and also the fact that it takes the franchise into kind of like when we've got Friday the 13th, when we had the the whole kind of Carrie kind of thing going on. And stuff like that. But the problem was this idea with Kirsten makes total sense in terms of the whole idea of the thing, whereas the Jason one didn't. It was introducing supernatural into a film that has supernatural but didn't really need it, whereas this works perfectly and isn't overdone either. It's not too in your face about it that she has these powers.
No. And I guess you could just say it's it's lucid dreaming, isn't it? It's being able to control what you do in your dreams. And yeah, I think you've got a valid point in that. But I think because it handles it well, whereas in the later films it becomes more comedy, the way in which they're dealing with it. Some of this aspect is kind of slightly larger than life, I guess we would say, and is a bit over the top. All of it apart from Kincaid. I find that the funniest thing. To jump forward a little bit, when they all they have the group hypnotherapy and they do it. Joey goes off to try and lay pipe, which fair play, poor dog. Will stands up. Taryn kind of has a complete makeover. In my dreams, I'm beautiful and bad. And then Kincaid is just like, I'm going to bend a chair. He's just like, I'm strong. and he doesn't like bend it easily. He has to like force it. And it's like,
it doesn't look like a seamless transition. He is literally like, Whereas we're all sat there going, I feel like maybe if I tried, I could do that.
I'd be like Superman.
I could bend that chair. Like, I don't feel like that's completely. You could have broken down a door, or you could have snapped it completely in half. Instead, you just bend two legs on a chair.
Slowly bend two legs on a chair.
Slowly.
Yeah, it's just really fun.
We get the next, because that's obviously when they start to build into the idea and they start to listen a little bit more. When the doctors start to listen, and what's the name of the we've got Nancy, but then what's the name of the doctor that starts to help?
Dr. Gordon, I think his name is.
Yeah, Dr. Gordon. So yeah, that's kind of when Dr. Gordon gets along with it, but that doesn't really happen until after Jennifer's death. They need another death to prompt them to
which is
have a go.
Again another kind of iconic death,
Oh, absolutely.
I'll let you sell this one.
It's got an iconic quip to go with it and everything, a classic line. But yeah, so because obviously Dr. Gordon, he starts to come around and the staff aren't listening, and Nancy wants them to go on the
Hypnosil.
Hypnosil, that's the one. Hypnosil.
And it's funny because I remember Hypnosil from Freddy versus Jason. That's what they use in that.
Yeah,
so
I
did.
And
when I was watching this,
I've heard it before. I was trying to remember which film it came from.
It was only when I watched this back I was like, oh shit, it actually is in Dream Warriors, which I thought was quite a cool little callback, kind of in retrospect.
Yeah. So just before the group, when they try their first technique, before they get to the Hypnosil, we get Jennifer, and obviously the woman in charge. I'm just going to go with woman in charge. She said that they're going to force them to basically stay in their rooms and basically going to drug them to go to sleep.
Yeah.
You got old Larry Fishburne, who played.
Yeah.
He played a smaller role in this film than I thought. For some reason, I remembered him being more in it.
I remember him being in less.
Oh really?
I thought he was only had a couple of lines. No, he's got a few scenes.
Yeah, I just thought he had a bit more to do with the plot. I thought he was more integral, but no, he is just that side character. He's talking to Jennifer because she's saying she wants to stay up because she doesn't want to be near the beds and stuff like that. She doesn't want to be locked up in a night after Philip's death and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So he's kind of kind to them, and he kind of that's all right, that's fine, and let's just stay up watching TV. You get a TV host part, don't you? With I believe the name of. I meant to look this up because I was wondering who the actress was, because there's an actress I think who's a fairly known one, which obviously turned into Freddy, who basically tells her like, who gives a fuck about what you were talking about.
Yeah, I love that because again, it's like when does she fall asleep?
Yeah,
it's like, what is the barrier from dreaming to being alive? Because it is just
you can tell
happens, doesn't it?
Drifting while she's listening to it. But and then it's so good. You start to get the heads start to grow out of the TV set. And it's just that head going through where it kind of looks like he's been covered in some kind of like cellophane wrap or something, because he's got like a layer over him. It kind of grows, because you can kind of tell it goes from like a puppet head into his real head, where they've had to wrap that around. And then obviously she goes out and she kind of goes towards, but then the giant arms, the robotic arms come out the side.
Yeah, it's like a scary version of Ace Ventura being born from the rhino, you know? It's like a horrible version of that.
Robert Englund's not in the script improv line, which is a fucking classic of a line. Welcome to Prime.
I didn't know.
Yeah, it's an improvised line. It wasn't in the script.
Really?
Yeah, the Welcome to Prime Time, bitch, wasn't in the script. Robert Englund made it up while they were filming different takes of the scene and stuff. Like, I've seen behind the scenes on that as well. I remember seeing a shot behind the scenes where it's literally like she had to be attached to kind of like a railing where it would kind of move backwards and forwards. So when her head went into it, they kind of had to like push her forward to kind of go into it, and so they could shoot it again. Kind of like her head would come back out and back into it, and they had to like replace the glass and stuff like that. It's a really interesting shot, but this film is full of memorable deaths.
And that's it. I think because the deaths kind of go from being, they become a bit more creative and a bit more visual. I mean, obviously we have like Tina's death, which is incredible, iconic, and Glenn's death, which, I mean, all of the deaths in the first one are amazing. And in the second one, we do get some great bits. But I think it's more that they become more elaborate, almost, you know, and they become like more of a spectacle, as opposed to being a bit more grounded in reality, like when, like, you know, just sinking into the bed. Whilst it looks amazing, you know, he is just going into a sinkhole. Whereas these are more elaborate, and I think it's such a good part for
it worked perfectly for the original film, because the original film had to introduce a villain and it had to make it darker, but the original film was also, and this is another problem that the franchise goes into, Freddy is very much the creature haunting them in their nightmares, and he is a background character. He is not the main star, which he becomes later in the franchise, where it's basically how often can we get Freddy on the screen. In the original film, he is a background. He only appears on those parts when they're going to die, and he's not in actually that many scenes until about the end. Apart from that, he's in only shots and stuff like that. You don't actually see too much. In this one, he is in it more, but he still is a side character to Kirsten and all of the Dream Warriors. He is still kind of that. He gets lots of elaborate bits, and yes, he still pops up quite a bit. But I remember in later sequels, it's like the Jack Sparrow effect in Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah,
a character that worked better when he was the side figure is then pushed further and further to the front, and therefore they have to come up with more and more lines for him to say and more things for him to do, and it wears too thin.
Yeah, no, I think that's precisely what happens with Freddy. The more it goes on, the more you're like, all right, fucking hell, what are you going to do now, man?
We didn't need more. In this film, again, I've said about that balance. I think this film has that perfect balance with Freddy, and again, it's meant to be your dreams. It's meant to be your imagination, and your imagination could go anywhere. So why shouldn't Freddy go into these weird and wonderful kind of places? Everyone should be able to be memorable, and that's what more of the nightmare films, if they go from here, need to do. They need to think about how far could special effects in your mind kind of take it without taking it too far, and only keeping Freddy to small parts, because the longer you drag out some of these amazing set pieces, the worse they become. These ones work because they're only a couple of minutes a piece. They might feel like they're longer, but like that TV one, there's only about a minute. The scene's only about a minute long because it's not long and drawn out. You could have done more. If it was one of the sequels, you probably would have had Freddy chatting for about another minute or two before she bloody died. You know what I mean? Instead of Welcome to Primetime, bitch, and slap, done. works
so
perfectly.
good.
That one is more of a glamorous one, though, I guess. The last one was scary. I wouldn't say this one's necessarily scary. It is a bit more of that where Freddy goes in the sequels, a little bit more glamorous kind of look at this, kind of look at what we can do, look how funny I can be. But it worked. That's fine as like a 1 or 2 deaths. But in the sequels, it becomes every death is about that line, about that joke, not just the occasional one. And therefore, all of anything scary about Freddy was destroyed after that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think most of the Dream Warriors in this, after their deaths, they do get a line. But
yeah,
I mean, I'm trying to think because obviously they do the group hypnotherapy session, and then that's when Joey sneaks off to lay pipe with that woman.
Because they all fall asleep.
Yeah, they all fall asleep,
They
don't notice. And then obviously they have the scene where, and that's a cool scene as well, when he kisses her and then the mouths kind of stick together, and she kind of latches him onto the bed, and kind of keeps him there. I think that's a really cool scene. Just to kind of
tied down by all of those. But the best part of that scene is when the bed drops. So you've got the fiery pit below. You've got again a cool special effect of the tongues are holding him in place while the fiery pit's below, and I think it's implied that the fiery pit starts to like burn his back, kind of thing. Like he's burning like the hog roast.
Yeah, the hog roast. It's so good, man.
And everyone else is in the. Isn't this because they're all asleep and stuff? Is this not? What do we see what they did? This is the bit I'm now blanking on. Is this the first time that they all get to talk about because they're all asleep together? Yeah, because they don't realize that they're all asleep, do they?
No, they don't.
They think they're all in an argument about getting out of the room, and then suddenly they realize, oh shit, we are all asleep right now.
It's not until that thing with the balls.
The balls.
It's not until not until the balls start flying around the room. Read into that what you will. That they then realise maybe we're dreaming, and then Will's like, you know what? Fuck this, man. He stands up.
And we can create this world.
Yeah, then Kristen does like some backflips. Taryn's like, in my dreams I'm beautiful and bad. And then Kincaid's like, hell yeah, and he just slowly bends the chair. And everybody, it's like 20 seconds and people are just watching him bend this chair, and it's like, okay, so like you're stronger in your dream. You're stronger. You're not like you'd be like, I want to be like Superman strength, as opposed to being like, I just slowly bend a chair, But I love it. And then I think as Joey wanders off, they're woken up by Nurse Bin. I can't remember her name. And I think that's when Joey kind of stays in this comatose, moment.
And Nancy reveals that she believes, based on the link to their family, that they're the last of the Elm Street kids.
Yeah, and I think they obviously chucked in the last of the Elm Street kids as I think a way to kind of, probably link Wes Craven as a way to be like, not only to link it but to say this is the end, because it's the last of the Elm Street kids.
Yeah, this one definitely. Yeah, it's another thing I actually quite like is that it does take some of those turns. It gives us a few of those, final part in a trilogy twists where it's got some ideas to wrap things up and wrap up ideas, and it ends ideas that began in the original film, and I like the fact that this one does kind of feel like if they'd ended it here, that could have been it. That would have worked fine.
Yeah, definitely.
You know what I mean? There's a little hint at the end of whatever, but for the most part, this kind of feels like it could have been the end because they bring in some interesting idea. Last of the Elm Street kids. Then we have the nun that appears to Dr. Gordon.
Yeah.
Who tells him
Mary?
Who we find out is actually Freddy Krueger's mum.
Freddy mum.
Who was brutally it's an odd backstory. She was locked in the mental facility or the whatever it was, or the prison, or whatever it was at the time. She was locked inside over the weekend or week they were away or something, and basically was like raped by every single inmate and got pregnant with Freddy.
It's the bastard son of 100 maniacs, isn't it? I know, because they flesh that out in the Dream Master or the Dream Child or something like that. There's actually a scene where a character kind of sees her being locked in. It is quite a disturbing scene, to be honest. But it's that idea. Yeah, it's a disturbing idea.
It's a weird one, but it's disturbing.
Definitely.
I don't. But how you lock someone into that kind of place, and she's still actually near any of those people, is a bit like, okay. But
well, the later, when it's fleshed out later, because I think like she's doing the rounds or something, and one of the nurses thinks that she's the last one in, and that Freddy's mum has already left, so they lock her in, thinking that she's done and she's finished. But and to be fair, like, not quite to that level, but we had somebody at work, one of my colleagues, who they went to the toilet just before they went, and the cleaners who came in when we'd all finished working, they thought that she'd left. So they locked her in our office, but not just in our office. They locked her in like the airlock. So, and she was there until like probably like 9, 10. So though there weren't 100 maniacs in there, and she wasn't locked in all weekend, I mean, she had a mobile, so she could ring somebody to come and get her. But back in the 40s, whatever, maybe, maybe
not quite the same thing, but I can see how it would happen. It's just mad that she was like locked in the same area as all those people, that she'd be so nearby them that she could even go. But I don't dislike it. I think it adds a bit of flesh to the character, and it also gives us a way that we believe that we can kill Freddy Krueger, because she reveals that he needs to be buried somewhere of like holy ground or something like that. He needs to be buried, or away from holy ground or whatever it was.
I think he needs to be buried on consecrated ground. But like, he needs to have a proper burial. Yeah, it's kind of like he's a ghost or he's a revenant.
So it's not really holy ground, because it turns out to be they're doing it in the middle of a bloody scrapyard. That's not exactly holy ground.
No, but they use holy water, don't they? I think
they do. Yeah.
So apparently that makes it holy ground.
But just first they need to find Freddy's remains, and that's where John Saxon returns as
what's his name? Donald.
Nancy. What's her last name? I was going to say Loomis, but that's the actress out of her.
Yeah. Nancy Thompson. Donald Thompson.
Nancy Thompson. There you go. Yeah.
So, John Saxon. What do you reckon? Sexual man?
I'd say pretty sexual man.
Yeah.
I'd imagine so. He's to many ladies, I'm sure he was seen as a sexual piece of ass in this film.
Yeah, definitely. And he comes back as like this kind of drunkard. I like the way that he's no longer like the town police. He's like a security. And he kind of says that you can see that he's got like a strenuous relationship with Nancy now. I think it's like you said, if this had been the end of the franchise and it was just a trilogy, it kind of wraps things up relatively nicely, I think, because we have obviously Nancy's mum died at the end of the first one, and we're kind of introduced, we have Donald coming back, so I kind of, I get that if this was the end, if this was, the end of a trilogy, I get that it would kind of work. But I can never remember how he ends up, even though I watched it like last night or the night before. I still can never remember how he ends up telling him where the body is, because at first he's like, no, I'm not going to tell you. And then I think the doctor
then tries to beat him.
He tries to beat him in a pub. or a bar. But I can never remember how he gets him to agree to it, because when they do get to the scrapyard, he tries to drive away. So he's kind of like reverts to this absolute kind of chicken character, who just wants to get away from whatever he's done.
I think it's implied he's kind of become like a bit of a drunk after his wife is dead, and like he's kind of just like after what they did when they were obviously younger parents and stuff like that to Freddy and stuff. I think it's meant to be implied it's taken its toll. It's not perfectly handled. It doesn't make it as clear maybe as it could have, his like how he's been affected throughout the years, because he doesn't seem that different. I guess it's because of the passage of time. It's only 5 years between the original film and this one. So technically Nancy was like 17 in the original. She's like 22 here, which again, like she did seem way too young to me to be in this kind of position where she's like.
Well, I think they say that she's a college student, don't they? Or she's a grad student.
I think she's a graduate, but she was like of an honors. Like people were talking about her studies in a way. So she's seen as like a hot. She's a hot figure in the psychological
in the dream world. Yeah. Well, I guess if you're able
she's so hot right now.
That Nancy's so hot right now. I guess if you're able to go into a dream world and kill a dream pedophile, you're probably got to be like, okay, I'm a pretty hot deal now. You know what I mean? You're probably got to start pursuing that, aren't you?
I mean, I feel like I assume she hasn't got that far by saying, "Yeah, I killed a pedophile in my dreams."
I killed a pedophile in my dreams. But she's probably like,
that's like me
saying,
about the dream. I won an Oscar in my dreams.
Give
me the Oscar.
I want to make some kind of joke about Prince Andrew now, but I can't. But my brain isn't working. So just imagine that I made a very witty joke about Prince Andrew coming for people in his dreams. But then because that's it. Like once we find out that Dr. Gordon's trying to get Nancy's dad to come around, I think Nancy finds out that Kristen has been sedated. And then they have the second round of the group therapy where they go and confront Freddy, which is kind of where we move into Act 3. And then as they kind of go into this dream world, it starts to kind of cave in on them, and it's like this. It's almost like the inside of a furnace. They're surrounded by this kind of metal, and then they get separated, and then we get Taryn's death, which is, for me, I always thought that Taryn, it was a really interesting character. She's this kind of recovering addict. I always feel like there's an element of abuse in there, because there's one of the orderlies who's always trying to get her to get high with him. So
it definitely gives off that kind of feeling, and I definitely think that in the few scenes that she's in, like even the actress alone, I think the actress is really good in these scenes. She really pulls off that kind of vulnerability of Taryn with her past, and you really feel for it. And even those small scenes with that orderly, that gives you a bigger sense of, you feel like she's kind of been pushed into certain things, and that she's trying to do better. She's trying really hard, which kind of makes it all the sadder that Freddy is able to. So there's a real kind of vulnerability and a sadness that comes with this kind of badass, kick-ass kind of moment she has.
And I think her and Will, kind of upsettingly enough, I think her and Will are the first two to volunteer to go and save her, Kristen and Joey. And obviously they're the bravest of the bunch, I think. Definitely, seeing as how Kincaid is like wants to spark everybody out and is really strong in his dreams. Like he's the last one to volunteer.
Will and Taryn are definitely they're the strongest. They also, in their dreams, what they want to be, they're the ones that get the biggest transformations. So it's sad that they pretty much die together, and they die. There's like the first oft once they get into this dream world. We get Will, who obviously Freddy goes on about his like the fact that he'll be back in that chair before he knows it, kind of thing. And he's often a pretty. Does he just?
He hits him with this kind of. I mean, he dies after Taron, but he hits Will with this kind of wheelchair with loads of spikes on it and stuff. And then as it comes round, Will says, that he's the dream master, that he's the wizard master, and then he kind of lightnings it down. And then he says something about how he's like Lord of the Elves, and he starts zapping Freddy, thinking he's won. And then Freddy says, "Sorry, kid, I don't believe in fairy tales," and picks him up and just stabs him in the heart. It's kind of.
I thought it was.
I always kind of wince at it a little bit because Will is so kind of sweet, and he is such like, especially compared to the rest of the cast, he is the one who looks the youngest and looks kind of like the most fragile. Because he's this kind of scrawny Dungeons and Dragons, this scrawny little young boy, So it's always a bit like,
he's the biggest one into this kind of, because he's got that kind of fantasy kind of imagination. He does lean in like the perfect way that you'd think of, like where you're like, yes, I've got powers, right? I'm going to use my imagination that I've got for Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to bring this into reality. So he kind of gets to achieve a dream, I'd imagine, in his like that we kind of see, because he's a bit like really into it. But at the same time, it kind of sadly it just doesn't work. He's just not nearly got enough power compared to Freddy. Like he can do, he can stop something, but he hasn't got nearly enough. Once Freddy's gone, he's fucked. But it's not as it's quite good, but it's not the strongest of deaths in the film, and it's not as good as Taron's death.
No, I spoke about it. I spoke about it in Memoriam. But it is, just to kind of recap it, she's kind of in this. It's supposed to be implied that she's kind of in this back alley that, she's kind of used to being in from scoring and that kind of stuff. And there's this old man who kind of walks past her. And then Freddy comes out and they kind of have this quick kind of fight as she stabs Freddy up. And then I think the grim thing is seeing his kind of fingers turn into syringes, is just kind of, I think naturally syringes kind of make me squirm a little bit. So seeing them filled with this kind of blue liquid, and then seeing the track marks on Heron, on Taron's
that's the worst bit. The little puckering, like
waiting
for it. They're all like little mouths, like, come on, feed me.
It's like, so gross.
There's something really gross about those little puckering lips.
It's so horrid. And then obviously he just injects her and kind of kills her. And it is, it's an upsetting death. I always get my heart broken at that one.
Yeah, I wish we had more of Taron, to be honest.
So do I.
I kind of wish her character survived, and I wish she got a little bit more of an action in that scene, actually, because she kind of shows up in things. I know, like, I'm pretty sure the actress actually, she actually stabbed Robert Englund.
Oh, damn.
I read. So while they were like filming it and things like that, where she's meant to go at him with the knife, she actually partially stabbed Robert Englund. It was likely meant to be like a prop knife and things like that, but sometimes they swap them out for real things in certain shots, and I think there was a bit of a mix-up.
She
stabbed it. Yeah, so it's sad, but there you go. In real life, she got Freddy.
she killed him. And then where did we go after that? They find Joey.
We've got the graveyard, and I think we are at the graveyard now, and we've got them trying to bury the bones, and obviously Freddy catches onto that and realizes that's when you start to get all the lights in all the cars are going off, and he's trying his hardest to stop it. And at the same time, they rescue Joey, but Freddy's taken too many souls at that point. It's implied that he's too powerful.
And it's really cool because I think this is the first time in the franchise where we see the souls in Freddy's body. We see the faces kind of calling out, that kind of stuff. And it's just kind of like a nasty, it's like a slight, body horror element to the film. and then obviously he goes and he goes to the graveyard, and we see. It always reminds me of a bit of like, kind of old school style Clash of the Titans, where we see like John
Freddy's
Saxon,
bones.
fight Freddy's bones with like a shovel, and then obviously rip John Saxon.
I love that bit. I love the bit with Freddy's boat, like in that stop motion style kind of thing. I love that whole like fighting him like that. I think it's such a classic kind of effect, but it looks good. I've got no reason to like go against it. And then obviously, old Nancy's daddy gets thrown against one of the cars and gets impaled.
Yeah.
So at first I thought I didn't know if he was gonna. I think I've got so used to recent horror films where people survive certain damages that I was expecting him to suddenly like crawl off of it or something. But no, I think that's the last shot we get of him. He's dead.
Yeah. Because I think he dies. And then what is it? So I think, is that when the snake returns? I can't remember if the snake returns then, or is that the bit where they all kind of get dragged into the mirrors, isn't it?
Yeah, they get dragged in. Oh no, that was when Joey saves them. They all get dragged into the mirrors, but Joey's the one that breaks the glass. So but he goes, no. Yeah, his voice actually comes out and it shatters everything. All of them, and they all come flying out the mirrors, including Freddy. I feel like it must have been around that time. I'm forgetting exactly when, but it's definitely before, because I know what comes next, and the worm thing had happened before that. So yeah, she'd consumed him. She'd started to Freddy, and started to consume as the worm thing Kirsten, and it's Nancy who kind of helps her, isn't it?
That's earlier in the film, I'm sure. That's when Nancy's first summoned.
It came later. Oh,
maybe you're thinking it came later.
It is, yeah. Maybe I thought it came back again, but no, I think it is just that scene. She helps pull him out. Yeah, because that's the first time that Nancy realized Kirsten has that ability.
Yeah, so it's earlier in the film.
I'm just thinking it came back later. I think it's because we see a shot of that worm near the beginning of the film. And then it comes back to haunt her again in that scene with Nancy. Yeah, so then this is the weird scene that I completely forgot was in this film.
I forget this every time.
It's John Saxon coming back like he's in freaking Ghost, or he's coming down like Beauty School Dropout or something.
Yes, it's exactly Beauty School Dropout, isn't it? It's when he just comes down. He's like this
kind of sparkle effect.
Yeah,
it's one of these where I sat there going, I mean, I guess it's nice that they're allowing father and daughter to reconcile, but it got me because I completely forgot what happened. So
yeah, every time it gets me as well. Every time I
haven't seen this one in like a decade. So, but it completely. I remembered most of it though, but this part I was like, what the hell's going on? I was like, this is weird.
I probably watched it last 2 years ago. Always gets me.
Yeah, I was thinking, I guess it's nice to have a bit of sentimental, as they didn't leave it on the best of terms. I guess it's nice, but this feels a bit out of place. We've never established that they can come into the dream world of this. So I don't know why it didn't click in my head to think that this is a trick, but it didn't. He comes down and he hugs her, and I'm just like, yeah, okay, that's weird.
And every
it's
time,
not quite as heartfelt as I think it would be, but okay, fine.
Every time I remember I see this scene, I forget about it, because it's only like a split. It's only like a 15-20 second bit. It's not made massive, and every time I see it, I think, oh, it's like Force Ghost John Saxon, and we're going to get Nancy kind of like against something, leaning and looking at him, and then that like balance from a Star Wars soundtrack plays as it kind of fades up, and I'm like, this is really weird, and then it's Freddy and he stabs Nancy, and I'm like, here we go. It's just always a scene that just catches me by surprise.
It's weird. I think it's because it seems so out of place, but then it weirdly, it's as if it knows that, because it's kind of actually brilliant, because it does so, including it kind of now in retrospect, it seems humorous that he adds in that whole kind of sparkling effects, like glowing effects around her. Obviously, this is before Ghost, so it's not Ghost, but it's that kind of Ghost kind of imagery of like the light shining around him that it's like, it seems so out of place that it's like you forget. It's a perfect way to make you not even think about the twist that's coming, which is that Nancy is fucked. Like, he gets Nancy in the gut with the glove, you know, the inside, and Kirsten like obviously reacts, and you know, Freddy thinks that Nancy's dead and throws her to the side kind of thing, and they all kind of think she's dead.
Yeah.
And then I can't remember what I'm blanking on what he does next with Kirsten now, because he goes after her. I can't think of anything specifically that happens with her.
I'm sure he's just about to kill her, and then
he gets
Nancy.
Her, he just gets her, and Nancy returns, and she has the glove.
Yeah, and then she just stabs him in the back or something. And then when she stabs him,
Neil,
he kind of backs
Gordon.
off. Yeah, Dr. Gordon starts burying the bones, and he kind of has that effect where, you know, the holes start appearing in him. And he's like, no. You know?
Oh, yeah, as Nancy dies.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it comes back, it kills Nancy, but again, I feel like Nancy has a good arc in this film from the original to this one. It feels like a kind of natural, and because that is such an effective twist, it feels like it works. Because we had time to get to know Nancy, we got to see her kind of achieving more, but I feel like because of the character and the way that he's able to get to people, sadly, with Freddy, it is one of those things where you feel like there's not really any way for anyone to ever fully escape. Like, she's had to drug herself for years in order to never have him come back.
Yeah, that's it. It's kind of how do you end it? And I guess this was the kind of way of potentially trying to do it, because obviously then we have the patient's funeral. Dr. Gordon kind of walks around the corner. That's when he finds the tombstone and sees that you know,
Sister Mary Helena.
Sister Mary Helena
Kruger.
Was Amanda Kruger. And then he goes to sleep with like with the something that Nancy used earlier, kind of, I think it's like a Malaysian dream doll or something like that. And he has Kirsten's house. And there's and then we get the shining light in there. There's a bit that I completely forgot to mention that I'm somehow unsure how we did it, but I think it's when Kristen first gets sedated, and then it almost goes back to the start of the film where she's listening to I can't remember what the opening song is, but she's listening to this music, and she's back in her room and she's doing stuff, and then her mum comes in and says like, oh, you need to get to bed, and then has the exact same conversation as it did at the start. And then Freddy's like, I told that bitch to get my bourbon, and he's got like his mum's head. I don't know how we skipped talking about that, but it's a bit that takes place earlier in the film.
That is quite the mother's head again looks really cool. The blood, like the parts of her like tendons and stuff hanging down her body and stuff.
It's still talking,
that's a really cool. Yeah, we did skip. There's a few bits we've skipped here. There's a few special effects I think we probably missed as well that people will be like, how did you forget to talk about that one? Like
that's it.
Isn't there the pig, the roasted pig or whatever?
There is a roasted pig, but I think that's early in the film. There's a suckling pig earlier in the film. You know, but yeah, you mentioned that you had some stuff about the production.
Oh yeah, so I was looking up because I'd heard apparently that Wes Craven basically on every single film was basically permanently offered, the first one to be offered. Would you like to come back? Would you like to write another? Do you want to come back? They'd always give it to him, and then he'd normally he'd quite often go no. With the sequel, he went no, I'm not interested in that. But obviously he and as I said, he hated the comedic way, especially the way it went in the next one, Dream Master. When obviously Kirsten returns for a small part in that one, doesn't she? And she's off quite violently in like a fire.
All of the Dream Warriors are killed off in the opening of Dream Master, just to set up this new, new character.
it might be down to cast, but it's also I hate it when horror. I do quite often hate it when horror films do that, when they just kill them off in the opening. I get it, but at the same time, it's just an annoying thing. Like, we've got all this development. Surely you could just build more story around these characters and introduce more instead of resetting. Because they do it especially in Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street. They seem to do it a lot. It's just like, right, out with them. Let's get some new ones.
Yeah, it would be nice if, we, instead of just killing off all the characters, we could get some kind of nice, almost nice closure for them, because I guess it gets to a point where Freddy doesn't come after them anymore, maybe when they stop being kids, they become too old for him, maybe that
too old for him. But it's because they're going to be like I said, like, I like the whole idea of the Elm Street children and the fact that he'll keep coming. It's almost implied at one point as if he'd keep coming until he'd got rid of all of the relations related to the Elm Street family and stuff like that, which again is a good way to bring it back. Obviously, sadly without the original, but it's a good way to bring it back around to say that I'm a relation, to bring in a relation or several relations of the original Elm Street family to bring it back to this kind of story for another Elm Street film. So I was looking at some of the different ideas that they have, and where else it could have gone. So earlier I was talking with someone from the You Run podcast, on Insta, and we were talking about like how good of a sequel this was, and he mentioned what a great, like, how fantastic it is, New Nightmare, but he also mentioned New Nightmare as a comparison that to him that it's that one, or Dream Warriors or New Nightmare to him is that. And I think I kind of mentioned, I know you're a bit of a mixed bag on New Nightmare.
Yeah, I don't really like New Nightmare.
You're not a keen on, like, you don't mind the concept, but you don't. I think I remember you said you don't mind the concept idea. You just don't think it's pulled off very well, kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I'm not overly huge on that.
Because it's a pretty. Sorry.
Yeah, a lot of people in the social media lounge on Twitter said that it was either this is the best sequel or New Nightmare. New Nightmare gets a lot of love. I'm not going to hate it.
Praise. It's got what's his name? Like, what's that British? Mark Kermode, who's quite a renowned British critic, and weirdly he praises this film all of the time. New Nightmare, I mean, not this one, all of the time. I always liked it because it gave me the early signs of what Scream could be. But I also wouldn't say that it's a perfect. It comes off to me like, I like the concept, but I always remember thinking that the way it looked very much like a TV movie. I don't like the way it's shot or anything like those kind of things. There are certain parts of it that just don't work in my mind. But again, I haven't watched it in a long time. But anyway, New Nightmare was the first one. That was actually Wes Craven's first idea. He pitched New Nightmare to them, all the way back to the third one. He said, he had that meta idea all the way back in this one, and saying, instead of trying to do that, the second one didn't really work. Why don't we try and do something like this? And the studio wanted a direct continuation. They weren't interested in that. He did come up with another concept, but before that, John Saxon actually came up with a pitch for the film. So several cast members came up with that. So it said that his take on it was a phenomenally weird and promise titled "How the Nightmare on Elm Street All Began," and this script was written by the actor, and it's basically, it turns Freddy into an innocent man who was framed for the child's murders in the backstory. So what is like a wild, and this has been played up again. This was kind of touched on a little bit in the remake kind of version of was he or wasn't he? But yeah, John Saxon was the first one to kind of pitch the idea of, Freddy being an unfortunate child, and who is blamed for them, and he returns from the grave to wreak havoc and mob the parents who are forced to confess the murders. All those kind of ideas. He wanted to kind of bring that back around for what they were thinking of, like a final part in the trilogy. So it was more of a prequel than it was a sequel. So he wanted to do a prequel version. Then we have Robert Englund, who gave us our third Wild Nightmare pitch. With his second drafted version of it, it was kind of repurposed because obviously there's been a lot of talk recently about Freddy's Nightmares, the TV series, which I've never seen. I heard in America they've released all the episodes on a streaming platform, so people have been watching it.
I think it's the Bloody Disgusting platform that they've got, and it's like an anthology kind of series, isn't it? But which sounds perfect for it. But yeah, carry on.
Yeah, his draft was entitled Freddy's Funhouse, which had started out as a script for a TV version, and then turned into what he thought would make quite a good sequel. And it apparently was really visually ambitious. In the script, the Springwood slasher made 1428 Elm Street his dream world abode and filled the house with killer booby traps in an inversion of the original movie's climax, trapping teens who had sought him out intentionally. This sprawling story would have featured a sister of one of the original victims as its heroine, and a sleep scientist as its antagonist. It's, extra antagonist. And a twist that brings the series back to its inspiration. Craven, the idea of teenage refugees dying of unknown causes in their sleep and doctors being stumped by the reason for it. The whole idea would have been, it kind of brings it back to that idea of why they're dying in their sleep and why were people dying in a different kind of way. So they were all trying to twist the concept. They weren't trying to go with the story. I feel like they were all trying to do something a little bit new.
Yeah, I mean, each one sounds like it could have potentially been interesting, to be honest. I mean,
and then Craven had what was seen as the darkest version, which is the one that they had him. He apparently wrote the script, so it's out there somewhere. I don't know if it's ever been leaked, but it was. They said, "Nah, this is too dark."
Damn.
So it saw numerous teens traveling to the same location to kill themselves. So it had the suicide part, but it was more about them killing themselves. And Nancy discovering they had all dreamed of Freddy before dying. So it sounds like maybe they took elements of this and redrafted it into Dream Warriors.
Potentially, yeah.
Krueger himself was less talkative in the sequel, so again, linking with Craven's lack of the comedic side that it went in. And he was more profane, so he, more disgusting, more sexual kind of way.
Nice.
And his dream home was not the Elm Street house, but rather a childhood ranch. So described in Craven's script as an architectural portal to Freddy's dreamscape and a virtually limitless world of the human psyche in all of its dimensions. The house also posed a problem for the series' finances, called it a $20 million script. So that might also be why they passed on it, because it was really expensive. So he had gone full into this one. He'd gone fully into the dream aspect, but he's really pushed for it to be, and when they start to say make it less less expensive, the Frank Darabont version was produced, which Frank Darabont, who you know for things like Shawshank Redemption and The Mist, he had a hand in what led to the final version of Dream Warriors. So it went on a lot of weird ways, but it sounds like Craven's one was the one that ultimately ended up inspiring a cheaper version, which became Dream Warriors.
Well, I think the budget for this, I think the budget for this was like $4.5 million. So it's definitely a cheaper version. And like you said, we've got the elements of the suicide. So you can see that that's in there, and this kind of dream research are definitely leaning into a bit more of the dreamscape. So you can see that, but again, I think that would have been a really interesting one to watch as well. I think the franchise itself has such an interesting, has scope for so much more. Just because of because you can play around with this kind of stuff. It's it's much easier as opposed to someone like Jason or Michael. As much as I love those boys, they're limited in how they can kill people.
Yeah.
You can come up with some elaborate things, but you can't come up with anything as elaborate as turning into a giant snake and eating someone.
No.
Whereas
this franchise isn't limited. It's so wide open, which is kind of why it became sad that they got so stuck in this post Dream Warriors kind of, or especially Dream Master, and they got so stuck in that. It's kind of sad that they allowed the franchise to get so stuck, and obviously New Nightmare and tried to kind of reinvigorate it in a different way, but that one was critically well performing, but not necessarily as financially.
Yeah.
But the whole idea of it, Freddy always actually was probably the best performing of all of the franchises, money-wise.
Yeah.
Because it has such a scope of imagination. I mean, I'd say to the studios and stuff, if that Wes Craven script was a $20 million script, well, I bet it probably won't cost you that now. Brush it off, update it, maybe get someone to do a bit of a rewrite, but you've got a script out there somewhere that might be a little bit Dream Warriors, but a little bit darker. That might be perfect for modern day.
Yeah, definitely.
With the scope of actual dreams in dream landscapes, that could be a perfect script. So I don't know if that script, I might go and have a look after this and see if that script exists anywhere. But
see if you can hunt it down.
Script out there somewhere that could well be adapted into a perfect modern day Nightmare on Elm Street.
And kind of, just to jump back over to the social media lounge over on Twitter at CMTH Podcast. This one was popping. So we had we had many replies. So I'm just going to read a few out. Obviously, Scaring Sam, another horror podcast. Sam said, it was the first time he was introduced to it was by a mate who prided himself on his vast collection of 80s horrors. First, he made him watch stuff like Ghoulies Go to College and Spookies. So Dream Warriors felt like a masterpiece in comparison, which I could definitely kind of get with. Simon did say that it was the original Legacy sequel. I got it wrong at the start. It was Simon. Karen Madarasi Whelan said that her favorite of the series loved the return of Nancy, but also Welcome to Primetime, bitch. So iconic. And then just to end us off, we had Mr. Cleaver, who said he owned the VHS and wore that thing out. He's turning 35 with it, and he feels it every year. And I told him, hey, that's not a bad thing. You can call yourself vintage. Boom. So you could always come over.
I've got a few, because I was asking people earlier about
take us over.
On our Insta, same again at CMTH Podcast, and I was kind of wondering, first I wondered what people's thoughts were. So we've got Midwest Mystery Files, who said a fun sequel that expanded on the lore of the first movie and its protagonist and antagonist without going too far off the rails. The series has always been at its best when both Robert Englund and Heather Langenkamp are both involved, which I agree. I feel like we've covered that. That's kind of our sentiment here. J.M. Kilborn said it's a great sequel and it was one of the last times Freddy was scary, which again,
I'd agree.
Pretty true. And then I asked a bit more of a controversial one. Is Dream Warriors, and Robbie, you could fit, is Dream Warriors the best Nightmare film? Is it the best? In terms of the way it uses everything it's there, is it better than the original? Does it take it further, or is it still just not quite there?
I don't know. I think I'd say it's maybe on par.
Yeah,
maybe better.
I feel like there are some it's one of those that's hard because I feel like I love the original and I think the original works perfectly what it is. And I feel like it's hard because I feel like even though these are close, they're also two very different beasts. One takes the imagination thing to the next level, but the original is definitely scarier. Yeah,
I think it could depend on which day you ask me, to be honest.
I think so. And it's pretty, although on Insta, it's been pretty united. So girls at Horror Friendly Podcast is just yes. And drinking beer and watch horror also said just yes, that they agree that it's a better film. Scream Queen from Hell said it's definitely my favorite of the series. Eva Lucas said it's a toss-up between this and New Nightmare, but he says he tends to lean towards Dream Warriors as the best. So we got most people were pretty much like, yeah, this is the best of the series, agreeing over. I didn't actually get anyone that said no, the original is the best.
That's interesting.
An interesting one, because it's on every other one I've ever asked about, people have normally gone straight away original.
For the original. Yeah.
So it's interesting that I feel like, yes, this definitely does. It takes the concept somewhere that I think people are interested in, and I think that people want to see more of. I think I want to see more of this, but I want to see less. I don't want to see humorous Freddy, though.
No, I'm with you on that.
I want to see a darker, scarier Freddy, but because he's still, even though he's doing weird tricks and weird creatures and stuff, that doesn't mean he can't be dark and scary just because he's got a bit of a twisted sense of, of like imagination.
No, and I think this film shows it. I think it is it's the last, for me. It's the last great Nightmare on Elm Street film. It does show Freddy having this kind of dark humor, but it's also takes itself. Freddy is taken a more, not quite as serious as the first one, but a bit more serious, and it is a bit darker. But then it does play with more elaborate death scenes, and the opening scene itself with the house and with the hanging corpses and all of that kind of stuff. It shows what nightmare stuff Freddy is capable of creating and subjecting our protagonists to, which is a terrible thing. Phil's death is prime death. This power, this feeling of powerlessness, and people watching it, and the horridness of somebody else controlling you, forcing you to do these things. I think it's an incredible film, really. And before we wrap up, have you got anything else to add?
No, I've literally just I love the original and I love this sequel, and although I don't mind New Nightmare, apart from the original and this one, I've got a soft spot for Freddy versus Jason.
Oh yeah, same. I enjoy it.
Everything else though is pretty much, I'm not a fan of the humorous Freddy. I just never really found it. I found it the series really lost its way there. So I love 35 years of this film, baby.
35 years, baby. So we hope that you've enjoyed this journey into the dreamscape with us to celebrate 35 years of Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors. As always, hit the subscribe button or the follow button so you get the episodes as soon as they come out. Thank you for all of the support so far as well. We've had some great feedback this month in general, so we always appreciate that. And always leave, if you could, please leave us a lovely review. It always helps. And we will see you next Monday, where we celebrate another anniversary. And we shall see you soon.